The Watts family seemed to have it all. Chris and Shannon Watts, with their two beautiful little girls, Bella and Celeste, lived in a spacious home in Frederick, Colorado. They were the picture-perfect American family, their lives documented extensively on Shannon's active social media accounts. Photos and videos showed a loving husband, doting father, and a happy, thriving family with a third child on the way. But on August 13, 2018, this perfect image was shattered into a million pieces. That morning, Shannon, who was 15 weeks pregnant, returned home from a business trip in the early hours. Her friend and colleague, Nicole Atkinson, dropped her off around 1:48 a.m. Later that day, when Shannon missed a doctor's appointment and wasn't answering her phone, a concerned Nicole went to the Watts home. After finding no answer, she called the police. When officers arrived, Chris Watts showed up shortly after. He let them into the house, appearing calm but concerned. He explained that he and Shannon had an emotional conversation early that morning before he left for work, but claimed he had no idea where she and the girls could be. Inside the house, Shannon's phone, keys, and purse were found. Her car was still in the garage. It was as if she and her two young daughters had vanished into thin air. As the police launched a missing persons investigation, Chris Watts gave a series of televised interviews. He stood on his front porch, pleading for the safe return of his family. He looked directly into the cameras, saying, "Shannon, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. If somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without you guys here." His performance was convincing to some, but to many viewers and investigators, something felt off. His body language seemed rehearsed, his emotional display shallow. The plea felt more like a script than a genuine cry for help from a desperate husband and father. Law enforcement, trained to spot inconsistencies, grew increasingly suspicious of Chris. The pieces of the puzzle just weren't fitting together. Why would a pregnant mother leave without her phone, her car, or any of her personal belongings? And why would she take her two young children with her without a word to anyone? The community rallied, organizing search parties and holding vigils. The story captivated the nation, with everyone hoping for a miracle. But behind the scenes, the investigation was closing in on the only person who was home when the family disappeared. Investigators brought Chris in for questioning. They pressed him on the details of his morning, his relationship with Shannon, and any problems they might have been having. Initially, Chris stuck to his story. He painted a picture of a normal, happy marriage. But investigators had already uncovered a crucial piece of information. Chris was having an affair. He had been seeing a co-worker, Nicole Kessinger, for several weeks. This revelation blew his perfect family narrative wide open. The financial strain the family was under also came to light. They were facing foreclosure and bankruptcy, adding another layer of stress and motive. Under the pressure of a polygraph test, which he failed spectacularly, Chris's story began to unravel. Faced with the evidence of his affair and the inconsistencies in his account, his demeanor changed. He asked to speak with his father, and in a private conversation that was being recorded, he confessed. But it was a partial, twisted confession. He claimed that he and Shannon had argued after he told her he wanted a separation. He alleged that, in a fit of rage after his confession, Shannon had taken the lives of their daughters. Chris claimed that he then, in his own blind rage, strangled Shannon. It was a horrific, blame-shifting story designed to paint himself as a victim, a man pushed to an unthinkable act by his wife's supposed monstrosity. But investigators didn't buy it. They knew this was another lie, a desperate attempt to mitigate his own guilt. The evidence and the very nature of the crime pointed to one person, and one person alone, as the perpetrator of all three murders. They continued to press him for the truth, and more importantly, for the location of his wife and daughters. Finally, Chris Watts broke completely. He admitted to killing his pregnant wife, Shanann. Then, he confessed to the most sickening part of his crime. After murdering their mother, he put his two little girls, Bella, aged 4, and Celeste, aged 3, in his truck with their mother's body. He drove them to a remote oil field owned by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. There, he buried Shanann in a shallow grave, and then he did the unthinkable. He smothered his daughters, one by one, and dropped their small bodies into 2 separate oil tanks. The details were beyond comprehension. The man who had portrayed himself as a loving father had methodically and brutally ended the lives of his entire family. His motive? A selfish desire to erase his old life to start a new one with his mistress, unburdened by a wife, 2 daughters, and a baby on the way. He saw his family not as people to love and protect, but as obstacles to be removed. The discovery of the bodies at the oil site confirmed the nation's worst fears. The search was over, and the horrifying truth was laid bare. The public's hope turned to outrage and grief. How could a father do this? The case became a chilling study in domestic violence, deception, and the dark secrets that can hide behind a curated social media facade. To avoid the death penalty, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges against him, including multiple counts of first-degree murder. In November 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each person he murdered: Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and their unborn son, Nico. The Chris Watts case serves as a stark and tragic reminder that appearances can be tragically deceiving. The smiling photos and happy family videos hid a dark reality of lies, debt, and infidelity that ultimately culminated in an act of unimaginable violence. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the most dangerous monsters can sometimes be the people we are supposed to trust the most. The legacies of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico now live on as a powerful warning and a heartbreaking symbol of the devastating consequences of domestic abuse. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like and subscribe for more content. On the night of October 25, 1994, a frantic 911 call shattered the peace of Union, South Carolina. A young mother, Susan Smith, claimed her car had been stolen with her 2 young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, still strapped into their car seats. The call sparked one of the largest manhunts in the state's history. Susan described a carjacker, a man she said forced her out of her Mazda Protégé at a stoplight and drove off with her children. Her tearful pleas on national television captured the hearts of a nation. People from all walks of life prayed for the safe return of Michael and Alex. The community rallied, plastering the boys' smiling faces on posters, and volunteers scoured the local area, hoping for a miracle. For 9 agonizing days, the search continued, with Susan and her estranged husband David making repeated, emotional appeals for their son's release. The story dominated news headlines, and the image of the distraught mother became a symbol of every parent's worst nightmare. But as the days turned into a week, inconsistencies began to surface in Susan's story. Law enforcement officials, led by Sheriff Howard Wells, started to have doubts. Her description of the carjacker was vague, and her account of the event had subtle but significant changes with each retelling. Investigators worked tirelessly behind the scenes, re-interviewing Susan and piecing together a timeline of her movements on that fateful night. They couldn't find any physical evidence or witnesses to corroborate her story of a carjacking at the intersection she described. The pressure mounted, not just on the police to find the boys, but on Susan herself, as the focus of the investigation slowly shifted. The public, who had once offered unwavering support, started to whisper. Could a mother who appeared so devastated be hiding something? The question hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the initial wave of sympathy. On the 9th day of the search, the facade crumbled. During an intense interrogation, Susan Smith confessed. There was no carjacker. There was no abduction. The horrific truth was far more disturbing. She admitted that she had driven her car to the edge of John D. Long Lake, put it in neutral, and let it roll down the boat ramp and into the dark water with her 2 little boys asleep inside. Her nationally televised pleas for their safe return had been a calculated deception. The confession sent shockwaves across the country and the world. The community that had prayed for the boys' safety now grieved their loss, their sorrow compounded by a profound sense of betrayal. The motive, as it unraveled, was just as shocking. Susan had been involved in an affair with a wealthy local man, Tom Findlay, who had recently ended the relationship. In a letter to her, he had stated that he wasn't ready for a ready-made family. Prosecutors argued that Susan saw her children as an obstacle to her desired life with him. She chose to eliminate them in the hope of winning him back. The trial of Susan Smith began in July 1995 and was a media circus. The prosecution painted her as a cold, selfish, and manipulative woman who had committed an unspeakable act for her own personal gain. They presented her tearful television appearances as a cynical performance, a calculated lie to cover up a double murder. They played her confession tape, where she calmly detailed the final moments of her sons' lives, a chilling account that left the courtroom in stunned silence. The defense, however, told a different story. They argued that Susan was not a monster, but a deeply troubled woman with a history of depression and a traumatic past, including being molested as a teenager by her own stepfather. They claimed she was suicidal on the night of the murders and had intended to go into the lake with her children, but panicked and got out of the car at the last moment. Her lawyers portrayed her as a victim of her circumstances, a fragile mind pushed to the breaking point. They hoped to spare her from the death penalty by showing a side of Susan that was desperate and mentally unwell, not evil. The jury was faced with an immense task: to decide the fate of a woman who had become one of the most hated figures in America. After deliberating, they found her guilty of 2 counts of murder. The next phase was sentencing. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, arguing that the heinous nature of her crime warranted the ultimate punishment. They recounted how Michael and Alex would have woken in terror as the car filled with water. The defense pleaded for mercy, reiterating her history of mental illness and emotional distress. They brought witnesses to testify about her troubled life, hoping to evoke some sympathy from the jury. In the end, the jury chose to sentence Susan Smith to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some felt that justice had not been fully served, while others believed that a life spent in a prison cell, haunted by her actions, was a fate worse than death. For Susan, the verdict meant she would spend the rest of her days behind bars, a constant reminder of the night she drove her children into a lake. Today, Susan Smith remains incarcerated at the Leith Correctional Institution in South Carolina. She will be eligible for parole in November 2024, a prospect that has reignited public debate and pain for the family. Her ex-husband, David Smith, eventually remarried and had more children, but has spoken publicly about the unending grief of losing Michael and Alex. He has stated he will be at her parole hearing to ensure she is never released. The case of Susan Smith left an indelible mark on the American psyche. It forced people to confront the unsettling reality that evil can wear a familiar, even sympathetic face. The story serves as a chilling reminder of the dark capabilities of the human mind and the devastating consequences of desperation and deceit. The names Michael and Alex Smith are not forgotten. They are remembered as 2 innocent boys whose lives were cut short by the one person who was supposed to protect them. Their story is a tragedy that continues to resonate, a somber chapter in the annals of true crime that still has the power to shock and sadden us all. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of harming yourself or others, please know that help is available. You can contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline or other mental health resources in your area. You are not alone, and there are people who want to support you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.